Welcome back. Today, Brendan and I are going to be talking about the power of storytelling in recruiting. It's the most powerful tool you have. So, Brendan, I remember when you were interviewing me, shortly, almost 5 years ago.
Wow.
I know, it's been quite a while.
It has.
And you shared some stories with me. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk to you about why you use that tool of storytelling. Give us a little sense about the magic behind a story, especially from a recruiter's point of view. And then let's dive into how do you teach others to share their stories?
Love it. And there's lots of science I know you're a big fan of that we can cite too that I think people would learn from.
Okay.
So my observations about the world of recruiting today is, I'm sure you've gotten these types of messages. Could start with an email you get, a phone call, may actually be a conversation with a recruiter. And I think the lack of storytelling to me is candidly pretty damn atrocious. So I think that there's a humongous opportunity to, one, differentiate yourself as a recruiter by telling a story, because that's really the thing that you need to do is grab someone's attention. And facts, figures, we're a fast-growing company, we're growing by X percentage. While maybe that might be interesting at some level, it's not going to grab anyone's attention. And think about when you make a decision. When I make a decision on anything, particularly a job, I'm going to go home and talk to my family about how I felt. I had a great experience. Here's what the team was like. Here's how I felt walking out of the building. And that is really where science tells us and emotions take you in terms of your decision making. So focusing there is an absolute positive must. And then the other thing is so many companies have amazing stories, have amazing people that have incredible things to share. So I think we're missing massive opportunities just day to day as a recruiter if you're not doing these things.
So when you and I met, you kind of laid out the storyline of LinkedIn, and then you kind of zoned in, for me anyway, the story about HR and the evolution of HR at the time.
Yeah.
And the story was a little bit of history, a little bit of where we are, and then a lot about the opportunity. And I remember how I felt. Mm-hmm. And I remember all the facts and figures, to your point. I just remember how I felt like, I can see myself solving those problems.
Yeah.
So in my research about storytelling, it does release chemicals in the brain.
Yeah.
And we can't help but become more empathetic and compassionate to the person telling the story, and you actually get pulled in the story. I mean, for generations, humans have been sharing bedtime stories and the hero and whatnot. And part of that is passed down tradition. Part of that is to get the right behaviors, to reinforce culture, to reinforce what it means to be successful. Now, my thinking on this would be that you would have to change that storyline by individual, by candidate, by role, by where you are in the life cycle. That's a lot. How do you skill up your recruiters to do that? And is that something that you think has better return on, versus, hey, here's the job spec, you look like you fit, we're great, we give great benefits, we pay well. That's no longer sufficient, is what you're saying.
Absolutely not sufficient. We do skill people. We spend time actually teaching people how to tell a story. And we spend a day and a half explaining the building blocks of telling a story, what the science of story is, what it tells us around how people make decisions.
In terms of getting to what I call the gold key, what's really in it motivates me, the candidate, and how you teach a recruiter to tell a story that aligns to those points. What is that skill? Because that would seem to be becoming the power play of every recruiter. Because I do know how you made me feel after our conversation. Mm-hmm. And you want that to be inspiring. You want me to want to come back. And stories help you do that. So what do you do?
I mean, one, there's very specific things. I mean, you have to start out with a goal. We talked a little bit about setting the agenda and understanding what's important. So you got to enter into it. I mean, there's need to be a beginning and middle and end of the story you tell, whether it's a 3-minute kind of elevator pitch based on something, or we're sitting down over dinner for an hour. You need to know that there needs to be a beginning, middle, and end. You need to have a goal of what you're trying to relay in the story. In the case with you, there's a massive opportunity here, and there's an arc of what it could look like for someone like you to come in here and make changes and make impact. And then you really want to grab someone's attention. So when we met, we got up at the whiteboard.
Yep.
You may physically move around. I mean, it needs to be experiential to literally get the senses going as much as you possibly can to engage someone. And then you really sort of need to pull people in to enable the story. So one, they start picturing themselves in it. So I teach things like, here's the marker, let's get up at the whiteboard and let's talk about how the company's going to grow. Why don't you draw for me the following graph or something like that? Really, really pull people in. And then you really want to get to the point where someone's going to walk away with something that they can relay and make it memorable. And for me, I feel like I'm in the business of recruiting and hiring, but I'm in the business of making memories. I want your experience to be memorable. And I realize that sitting in a conference room is not going to be that memorable. Getting up at the whiteboard, more memorable. Walking down the hall, talking to someone who's incredible, that has maybe a shared interest that you do, that's going to be memorable. Doing something that's going to get you thinking differently is going to be memorable.
So let's step back a bit and go back to, how did you craft that LinkedIn story? Because I know you spent a ton of time and you go and spend energy and cycles with the recruiters, because you want to create that story across the world and then empower them to redo this for themselves, make it more authentic. Can you disaggregate what that looks like, just for tips?
Absolutely. And we've got the luxury of having a very mission-driven company that has a very clear set of visions and vision and values. But one is getting a feel right away, like, okay, recruiters, what does the company do? Like, what is this place about? And there weren't the best answers. There were some, but the reality was we do have very clear. If Reid Hoffman, I always say in the story, if Reid Hoffman walked in the door and said, Reid, why does LinkedIn exist? He would immediately cite our vision to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. It's a big deal. Let's talk about, for the next 20 minutes, what the heck does that mean? So really getting grounded in, why does your company exist? Not at a facts and figures way. You may need some of that to back it up. But like, really, what's the story of the company? And if you don't know, go ask your manager, walk down the hall if you're a small company and talk to the president or founder or CEO and say, what is this place really all about? So one, we wanted to get everyone grounded in, it starts with our mission and vision. Why do we exist?
All right.
And then move into, okay, mission and vision's good. Are there stories you can tell on how we're trying to make that a reality? For us, that's the economic graph.
Yeah, the proof points.
Proof point, here's how we're doing it, and we can walk down the hall and I can show you some examples of how we're focused on members as part of the economic graph. We'll talk to the member team.
Oh, that's good.
So one, sort of build the actual story of what the company does, why the company exists, and what the company aspires to. If you're working in a company that doesn't have that, I would say demand excellence and create that, or help the company create it. And then the other thing is, like I mentioned before, make sure you're understanding your audience and who you're telling the story to.
Is there any data, any way in which you're turning around and saying, if I tell great stories, the LinkedIn story, my personal story, make this memorable moment, that turns into offer accepts? Does it turn into a higher candidate flow?
It's a great question. So storytelling takes many, many forms. So there's, as an example, there was a company in the healthcare business, I think it's called Nurses Next Door, that was cited in a Forbes article where they really spend a lot of time storytelling. The article is about storytelling in the recruitment process. They were focused on video as the medium, so not super novel, lots of people using video, but really focused on storytelling. And they found that really changed their I believe it was their time to fill in some of the key metrics that most recruiters look at. Things change statistically. So I would think about it in every touch point you have with a candidate, know your audience, and then find whatever it is, whether it's a paragraph and an article about your company, a video, 3-minute conversation, relay a story. So it can statistically change.
How would you know what I didn't care about and what I do care about?
So as an example, I would spend the time to make sure I really understand what you want. And I'd probably start it early in the process on the phone. If we sat down in person and asked, what do you really want to do? Going
back to those probing questions that you talked about to really understand my motivations. That's smart.
So understand your audience, and if you don't have some way to have a relatable story, you don't have to tell it either. You might have a couple things to tee it up. Have other people tell it. You're brokering the experience. Make sure you get someone who's going to come in and talk about the hardest problems we have to you as an engineer, because you said that's the most important thing.
That's great.
So, finally, you want to make sure that you're using all this as a way to drive to some sort of decision. So throughout the process, make sure are you understanding the story of working here? Does it still relate back? Does it give you what you're looking for? Does it address your aspirations and your dreams? And use it as a way to force really the closure of the process at the right point, which is, hey, now that we've spent 8 hours with you, let's look back to that first conversation we had. You said you really wanted to work on some of the most computationally difficult problems you've seen. What have you found here? And just shut up, don't say anything. and see what the person says. And if they're saying, yeah, I really did understand that, you're in a good spot. Or if like, I didn't get it, then I would say, don't let the story go. I'd say, you know what, we do need to have you talk to more people. But check back in, because the story should relate back to what they told you was going to really drive their decision. Mm-hmm. And that you may reach the point where you realize, you know what, it doesn't align. And maybe, but we find in our experience here is if we're clear and we really are being honest and straightforward around what is great and what is not, people do self-select in. I do understand it's computationally really challenging. I understand that there's some challenges day-to-day working here, and I'm choosing to step forward and I self-select into that process. That's the best outcome you want. It doesn't happen all the time, but that's how you want to use the story towards the close.
Yeah, but through the storytelling, the more authentic it is, the more proof points you have, the better informed I as a candidate, when I choose to put my name in the hat or commit to you, I'll have better success.
Yes.
So I love that. I really appreciate all the insights, and I'm excited to tell more stories.